Welcome back to Stream Dreaming, everyone. I'm glad you're here. There are a lot of things that I love about my Airstream Basecamp, and as you've seen, there are quite a few things that I've changed. One of the things that I don't love is the Suburban Cooktop. Frankly, it feels cheap. It doesn't get very hot. It's a booger to clean. It feels cheap. I don't like cooking on it, so I'm going to replace it with the Dometic, which I think is a much better option. If you're buying them new, the price is about the same. So I'm not sure why Airstream doesn't opt for this from the get-go. But regardless, this is a better option. So this is a how-to. Now this project will intimidate a lot of people because you have to cut the copper gas line, reflare it, and hook that up. It can be intimidating. It does require a special flaring tool, which you can buy for between $15 and $50, depending on what kind you get and where you buy it. But flaring copper is, well, it's really pretty simple and straightforward. And at the end, there's a simple leak test to do. Little soapy water, look for bubbles, no leaks, you're golden. All right, now, just a heads up. This is about an hour and a half, 2 hour project. If you've never done it before, 2 hours. Unless you make the same mistake I made. And I'll show you that mistake in just a minute. All right, the first step is to shut the propane off at the bottle. Make sure you do that. If you hear hissing at this point, well, you've made a mistake and should probably address it. All right, you just have to get this nut loose, and it's a tight space and a small wrench, so be patient. Now, I should point out that to get to this point, you have to remove a shield underneath the cooktop. That's an Airstream part. It's part of the cabinetry. It's just 4 screws, and you see that piece of wood at the top of the screen? Well, it attaches to that. And it just stays in the cabinet. You can't pull it out. You just can't. There's no way to get it out. It's in there before they put the countertop on. And when you're done, you'll have to put that back on to protect the new stove. So once you get this loose, then it'll just come off by hand. We're about to see that here. Here we go. Okay. All right. Now you're committed. At this point, you're going to see it through. All right. Pull these rubber grommets off, and there's 4 screws. They connect to a plastic piece on the underside that kind of pivots. So I'm just reaching under there to manipulate that to get it into position so I can get the cooktop off. Now I'm only going to show you the front 2. The back 2 are the same method. Once you get that done, you can lift the cooktop out. Boom, it's magic. It's still connected with these 2 wires. Now these 2 wires are the source of my biggest headache in years. I do a lot of projects, and every now and again I screw up. But I don't remember the last time I screwed up quite as spectacularly as I did here. Now, it's right here that I screw up. You see, there is nothing holding those wires. Boom. They just slid behind the cabinet. So they are wedged in there behind the cabinet and the aluminum skin. And it is 30-odd inches down to the floor. I tried using my cell phone camera, but there's reflection from the aluminum. I could see wires, but I wasn't sure where they were. And there's the duct work for the heater vent there, and the wires were wedged in between that, and I spent 2.5 hours doing it. Finally, I just decided I would remove the countertop. You can see you got to disconnect the sink, you got to cut that caulk bead, and then there are 4 brackets that hold the countertop in place. Now, every time something like this happens to me, I realize there is a silver lining. One, you learn a little bit about this, you learn a little bit about yourself, and you remember why you're doing it. I'm doing this because, well, I like tinkering, and I really hate that Suburban Cooktop, and I want to change it. So it's the love-hate relationship that keeps me going through this. Now, to get to that 4th bracket, I had to take out that USB and 120 plug-in that slides up through the counter. With that removed, I fish the wires out and I tape them to the back of the cabinetry and to the propane line and to the front of the cabinetry. There is no way those wires are going to get lost again, not during this project. Now I put the tape down to give to act as a guide, to be sure it's a line to cut by, but it also keeps the laminate from chipping from the blade of the jigsaw going up and down. Old carpenter's trick. All right, and then just squaring up these corners because the Dometic requires a squared corner. Now the opening for the Suburban is just a little bit bigger. It's a little bit wider side to side than the Dometic requires, which is going to necessitate one little modification. We're going to glue a board that we're going to screw the right side of the new cooktop into on the underside of the countertop. But here's the part that intimidates most people. So I marked that line. Now that line has some flex to it. It goes into a rubber propane line, and so you can manipulate that. You can move it a couple of inches. So the key is to not leave it too long. If you're half an inch short, it's not a problem. You can make that up. Too long, and it's going to be, well, it'll just be harder. Better to just cut it right the first time. So that was just a mini copper tubing cutter. You can get those at Home Depot. Now, I haven't used this flaring tool before. I bought this at Harbor Freight, so it's a cheap unit. I'm not dissing Harbor Freight tools. They serve a purpose. They're not my first choice, but I couldn't find the tool that I really wanted, and I didn't want to spend a lot of money for a tool I didn't want, so I spent a little money for a tool I didn't want. I hope you can follow the logic here. But it's a pretty simple concept. This red vise has a V-shaped cone that just pushes into the copper and expands it. You'll see here in just a second. See that? See how it expands it into the opening on the form there? So we'll pull this out and we'll compare the end that I expanded to the one that came from Airstream. And you'll see that it's not nearly expanded enough. And that was my concern. I didn't know how much tubing to leave exposed out of that form. So I'm going to cut this end off and redo it. Now, when you do this, if you have a regular tubing cutter, it'll have one of those clearing tools on it, but it's essentially a V-shaped knife. So I just used a paring knife to get rid of the burrs on the inside and to smooth that out. All right, leave a little more sticking out this time, and tighten that vise of that form, and then twist this. Now, you got to put a little bit of oomph into this, not too much, just enough to form it. And copper's soft. All right, we're going to compare that, and it is close. Not quite as big, so I'm going to expose just a little bit more and do this one more time. Now, these are just trials. Notice this is the scrap that I'm practicing on, as it were, because I don't want to screw up the line that I need to use. If you do, it's not a big deal. Swing by Home Depot, pick up another 5 feet of copper tubing and replace it. But I'd rather not. I've already screwed up once. I'd rather not screw up again. So that looks pretty good. You can see how much space it takes to get that out. Yeah, that looks pretty good. It's about the same size. Everything looks good. All right. Most important thing before you expand or flare your tube, make sure that fitting there is already on the tube, because there is no way to get that on if you don't. All right, that's done. I'm going to vacuum up the mess, all the sawdust, get rid of that. And then this block of wood here is we're going to screw the Dometic, the right side of the Dometic into that. You'll see how much I leave sticking out here. What I did was I measured the underside of the Dometic to see where that needed to be. Okay, you can see a little comparison between the two stoves here. The Suburban on the left, the Dometic on the right, and I can't tell you how much more I like the Dometic. I mean, looks, function, everything. It is just so much superior. And it's going to be easy to clean. That Suburban, the only redeeming value it had is it actually functioned. Now this is the hardest part of the install if you don't have to fish the wires out, and that is just getting these two new wires in there. There's probably an easier way to do this than kind of standing on your head like I am here, but it's just two screws, and at this point my biggest worry is that I'm going to screw up again and lose one of these screws. So I've got it here. It's in there solid. Attach the shield back to the unit, and we're good to go. All right, now we've got to hook up the gas line. This is the part you all wanted to see, so I'm going to show this at normal speed. We've been at 2 to 4 times normal speed here for a lot of this, but here it's just a matter of screwing it on. Just like we unscrewed it, we're just doing the reverse. Now, I'm going to tighten this a little bit. I'm going to do it improperly. Now, that's a 2-wrench fitting, when I'm only using 1 wrench. I'm going to get it reasonably tight, but not tight enough. And then we're going to spray some soapy water on it, and I'll show you what a bubble looks like. Because since it is propane and it is in a confined space, we want to make sure we have it right. Okay, so this is designed to leak. And watch it, you'll see a bubble form right between the 2 nuts. Here we go. Wait for it. Wait for it. Wait for it. There it goes. Did you see that bubble right there? All right, so we know we have a little leak. It's not even a big leak. It's just barely a leak. But this is the proper way to tighten this. You put a wrench on the right side and on the left. Now there's no pressure on your cast part of the stove. All of the pressure is going to be transferred to that copper fitting. And you don't want to get carried away here. You don't want to mash it. You don't want to cause a leak by making it too thin or tearing it. Maybe a half a turn, no more than that. And there you go. Now we'll spray soapy water on it again and watch for any bubbles. And no bubbles. We are good to go. You could do that as many times as you want, however many times it takes to make you feel comfortable. All right, now there's 4 little metal corners. You see those on the end closest to you, and I'm going to knock a couple of them off and have to redo this before I get the stove in place. There we go. See, I told you. You can see the one on the back left corner. Now I put the one on the front left corner, get the one on the front right corner, and try this again. Doesn't matter what you do, there's a learning curve, and hopefully this video helps with that. That's the intent anyway, so you don't have to make the same mistakes I made. You can make your own. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now before I screw it down, I want to test it. Everything is hooked up. I've turned the propane back on. Boom, look at that. Oh, look how nice that flame is. And look how nice it functions. You can't hear it, but I press that button and it just ignites. It's fantastic. There's no click, 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 click. Oh, I love this. All right, now this side, we're going to drill a hole because we're not screwing into the countertop. We are screwing down into that piece of wood that I glued on the underside of the countertop. And you'll need a longer screw for that, by the way. Okay, now that is screwed down. We are good to go. Put the grill in, and this project is done. I still have to hook up the sink and a few other things that aren't really part of this project, but you get the idea. It looks good. All right, as always, if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, share it with somebody, subscribe. Do all three. I like having you around. Thanks for watching. And remember, if you're going anyway, you might as well make it an adventure.